People who forgave their partner for cheating. How did that turn out? Story 1. Forgiveness became a weapon. My wife, after an affair with our neighbor, begged for forgiveness. I foolishly gave it. But the resentment festered. Every argument, every disagreement, I'd throw it in her face. "Remember when you slept with the guy next door?" I'd sneer. It became a twisted power dynamic. She'd try to make amends, but I'd push her away, reveling in her guilt. Then she started cheating again. This time, it was like she didn't even care if I found out. The cycle continued, a toxic dance of betrayal and revenge. We became two people living in the same house, filled with hate, and the house became filled with attention. We were both miserable, but neither of us could break the cycle. The forgiveness I thought would heal us became the chains that bound us to a toxic relationship. Story 2. My husband and I lived in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind where everyone knows everyone. That's how I found out about his affair with our next-door neighbor. One of the other moms mentioned seeing them together at a motel, and at first, I didn't believe her. But then I noticed the subtle changes, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way he flinched when I touched him. We tried to talk, but he just denied everything. The tension in our house was unbearable, especially with the kids. They could sense something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. Our son started having nightmares, and our daughter became withdrawn. I eventually confronted him with the evidence, and he finally confessed. The whole neighborhood knew, and it was humiliating. The kids were devastated, and I couldn't look our neighbor in the eye. We ended up moving, but the damage was done. Story 3. Ben and I had been together for 7 years, a solid, comfortable relationship. Then, I found the texts. Not just flirty messages, but full-blown emotional confessions to a coworker. My world tilted. Initially, I wanted to pack a bag and disappear. But something held me back. Maybe it was the years. Maybe it was the way Ben looked when I confronted him. A mix of shame and genuine devastation. We went to couples counseling, which was like learning a new language. We talked about everything. Our unmet needs, our communication breakdowns, the way we drifted apart. Ben had to rebuild trust, which meant transparency I hadn't thought possible. He shared his location, his passwords, and even let me read his work emails for a while. It wasn't about control, it was about reassurance. Slowly, I started to see the man I fell in love with again, not the one who betrayed me. We rediscovered intimacy, not just physical, but emotional. We started having weekly date nights, trying new hobbies together, and just talking, really talking about our day, our fears, our dreams. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, but we learned that forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Now, 5 years later, we have a stronger bond than ever. It's not the same relationship we had before. It's something new, something forged in fire. Story 4. My husband's affair was a shock, but the aftermath was even more surprising. It forced us to confront issues we've been avoiding for years. Our lack of intimacy, our differing life goals, our unspoken resentments. We went to therapy, not just to fix our marriage, but to fix ourselves. I learned to set boundaries, to communicate my needs, to prioritize my own happiness. He learned to be more emotionally available, to listen without judgment, to be a partner, not just a roommate. We discovered new hobbies, new passions, new ways of connecting. We started traveling, taking dance classes, and even volunteering together. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about creating a new future. We became more honest, more vulnerable, more authentic. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's stronger and more fulfilling than it ever was. We learned that forgiveness isn't about condoning bad behavior. It's about choosing to move forward together with a renewed sense of purpose. Story 5. I messed up. Badly. A one-night stand during a business trip. I thought I'd gotten away with it, but my wife, Lisa, has a sixth sense. She found a credit card receipt for a hotel room and confronted me. I confessed everything. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. Lisa didn't scream, didn't throw things. She just looked at me with this empty expression that cut deeper than any words. She moved into the spare room. For weeks, we lived like strangers in our own house. Then, one night, she left a note on the kitchen counter. I'm willing to try. We started with individual therapy, then couples therapy. I had to face my demons, the reasons why I strayed. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. I learned to communicate better, to be more present, to appreciate Lisa in a way I hadn't before. We started going on hikes, taking cooking classes, and just spending time together, without the pressure of fixing things. It took time, a lot of time, but we rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and vulnerability. It's not perfect, but it's real, and it's ours. Story 6. I forgave him, or I tried to, I really did. After finding out about his affair, which lasted for months, I decided to give him another chance. We went through all the motions, therapy, date nights, the works. But something was broken and I couldn't seem to fix it. Every time he was late from work, every time his phone buzzed, I feel a pang of suspicion. I find myself scrolling through his social media, looking for clues, even though I knew it was toxic. The trust was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. I became hyper-vigilant, analyzing every word, every gesture. He was trying, I know he was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just waiting for the next opportunity. We ended up living in a state of perpetual tension, like walking on eggshells. After 2 years, I realized I was more miserable than I'd ever been. I couldn't live like that anymore. I left. It wasn't about whether he'd cheat again. It was about the fact that I couldn't trust him, and I couldn't trust myself to ever trust him. Story 7. My wife's affair with our son's soccer coach was a gut punch. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer audacity. We'd sit at soccer games, cheering, while she'd exchange knowing glances with him. I confronted her, and she broke down, begging for forgiveness. For the kids, she said, for the stability. I, for some twisted reason, agreed. We became co-conspirators in a charade. Every family dinner, every school event, we played a happy couple, a facade that felt increasingly brittle. The coach remained in our lives, a constant, silent reminder of her transgression. The air in our house became thick with unspoken tension. We started sleeping in separate rooms. The kids, oblivious, would talk about how much they loved family time. It was a sick joke, a constant, gnawing reminder of the lie we were living. Eventually, I couldn't bear it anymore. I told the coach's wife. The fallout was explosive, but it was a relief. The secret was out, and the charade was over. Story 8. Finding out my husband had been having an online affair with a woman from his gaming community was bizarre. Not the dramatic, in-person betrayal I'd always imagined. It was a slow burn, a gradual erosion of our emotional connection. We went to therapy, and it was like peeling back layers of an onion. He'd been feeling isolated, disconnected, like he'd lost his identity outside of being a husband and father. He found solace in a virtual world, a place where he felt seen and appreciated. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. We started scheduling dedicated time for each other, not just date nights, but also time to pursue our individual hobbies. We learned to communicate our needs and desires, to be more vulnerable. We even started playing some online games together, bridging the gap between his virtual world and our real one. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but we learned to build a new foundation, one based on honesty, communication, and mutual respect. Story 9. My wife's affair with her dance instructor was a shock, but the real surprise was how I reacted. Instead of anger and rage, I felt sadness. Sadness for her, for me, for us. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. She'd been feeling invisible, taken for granted. I'd been so focused on my career that I'd neglected our relationship. We decided to try something radical. A trial separation, but with a twist. We committed to weekly therapy sessions, both individually and together, and to exploring our own needs and desires. It wasn't about getting back together. It was about rediscovering ourselves. We started pursuing hobbies we'd abandoned, reconnecting with friends, and just enjoying our own company. After 6 months, we decided to try again, but with a new understanding of each other. We learned to appreciate each other's individuality, to communicate our needs, and to prioritize our relationship. Story 10. My husband and I had an open relationship, or so we thought. We discussed boundaries, rules, and expectations. But when he started developing feelings for someone he was seeing, the lines became blurred. He wasn't just having casual encounters, he was falling in love. He tried to downplay it, to reassure me that I was still his priority. But I could feel the shift, the subtle change in his demeanor. He was distant, preoccupied, like a part of him was always somewhere else. The conversations that followed were confusing. We argued about semantics, about the definition of love, about the nature of commitment. It wasn't a clear-cut case of cheating, but it felt like a betrayal nonetheless. The trust we'd built was shattered, and I realized that an open relationship wasn't for me. The lack of clear boundaries became the very thing that broke us. Story 11. My husband's affair was discovered by our teenage daughter. She found the incriminating text on his phone and confronted him. He tried to dismiss it as a mistake, but she wasn't having it. She showed me the messages, and the world imploded. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way it affected our children. Our daughter became withdrawn, resentful. Our son, who idolized his father, became angry and rebellious. Family dinners became battlegrounds. filled with accusations and recriminations. We tried therapy, but the damage was too deep. The kids had lost their trust in their father, and I had lost my trust in him. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, became a cold, tense space. The affair didn't just break our marriage, it shattered our family. Story 12. I caught my husband cheating while I was pregnant. We tried to work things out for the kids, but it wasn't happening. A year or two after we split, my oldest around 5 at the time, wanted us to get back together, so he made us sit in tiny kids' chairs. And his understanding of the divorce was Daddy lied, and lying is bad. Made his dad apologize. I accepted the apology during this adorable mini-therapy session, but explained that I will never have enough trust to be a family with him again. I think it was helpful closure for everyone and got us into a better position to co-parent effectively. FYI, my son is 10 now and is well-adjusted and loved. Story 13. I had an affair, a stupid, reckless mistake that almost cost me everything. My wife found out, and I don't blame her for wanting to leave. We went to couples therapy, and it was brutal. We had to confront all the issues we'd been ignoring for years. I had to learn to be honest, to be vulnerable, to listen. She had to learn to trust again, which was a long and difficult process. We started going on weekly dates, taking weekend trips, and just spending more quality time together. We even started a new hobby together, learning to play the guitar. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but we learned to communicate better and to appreciate each other more. We are still together, and it is a better relationship than before. Story 14. I discovered my husband was having not just one affair, but multiple. He had been using dating apps and meeting women for months. It wasn't a one-time thing, it was a pattern. I felt completely betrayed and disgusted. We have 2 children, and the thought of them growing up with a father who was so dishonest made me sick. I couldn't reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man I discovered. I tried to make it work for the kids, but the trust was completely broken. Every time he left the house, I wondered where he was going and who he was seeing. I couldn't live with that constant anxiety. We divorced. Story 15. My parents almost got divorced. I found out my mom had cheated on my dad. It was weird and awkward. They had a lot of yelling at first, then they started going to these meetings. I was worried they would split up, but then things slowly got better. They started doing more things as a family, like going on hikes and playing board games. They even started going on dates again, just the 2 of them. I think they learned how to talk to each other better. They still argue sometimes, but it's not like before. They seem happier now. Story 16. My wife had an emotional affair with someone she met in a virtual reality game. She spent hours in this online world, talking to this guy, sharing her feelings, and even engaging in virtual intimacy. I thought it was ridiculous, but she was completely invested in this virtual relationship. It was like she was living a double life. She would be distant and irritable in the real world. But then she would light up when she put on her VR headset. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just dismissed me, saying it was just a game. I felt like I was losing her to a digital fantasy. I even tried creating my own avatar and joining the game, but it just made things worse. It was a bizarre situation, and I didn't know how to handle it. We ended up in couples therapy, and it was a long road to recovery. She had to disconnect from the game and focus on our real-life relationship. It was a crazy situation, but we made it through. Story 17. I forgave him, but it was like living with a ghost. He was there, but the spark was gone. Every little thing he did, a late text, an extra shift, it all made me wonder. We tried date nights, therapy, everything. But the trust was a fragile thing, and it shattered again and again. Eventually, the effort outweighed the reward. We just drifted apart. Story 18. His affair was a wake-up call. We'd been coasting for years, taking each other for granted. We went to therapy, and it was hard. But we learned to communicate, to be vulnerable. We discovered new things about each other, and we fell in love again in a different way. It wasn't the same relationship, but it was stronger. Story 19. She found out about the online flirtation. It was more emotional than physical, but it still hurt her. We had a long, honest talk. Turns out we both felt neglected. We started scheduling time for each other, really listening, and making an effort. It's not perfect, but we're more aware now. We talk more, and we're closer. Story 20. She said she forgave me, but she never let it go. Every time I went out, she'd question me. She checked my phone when I was in the shower. It was suffocating. I tried to be patient, but it was like living under a microscope. It was easier to just end it. The constant suspicion destroyed any chance of rebuilding. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.